Palantir.
Hey, this is not a test. This is rock and roll. Time to rock it from the Delta to the DMZ. Is that me or does that sound like an Elvis Presley movie? Viva Da Nang. Oh, viva.
Welcome back to the channel, everyone. All right, this Palantir and coffee, we're going to be breaking down some of the more common arguments against Foundry. We're going to talk about industry, sort of where we are at in terms of this AI kind of craze and how we got here, and sort of the role that developers play in misguiding businesses and making bad decisions based on preferences that really don't align necessarily with the business. So we're also going to jump into an article that Sham posted today that talks about vendor lock-in. That's another common argument I hear from people about, you know, why would I choose Palantir versus this other thing, and aren't I going to be more vendor locked? Basically, we're just going to dispel some myths, right? We're going to dispel some myths. And so the Reddit crew, up to their shenanigans again. I actually quite enjoy reading these threads. I get a kick out of when people are just thread crapping all over things in Reddit. It's pretty funny. But yeah, you hear like some of these comments like about Palantir's platform being a dumpster fire. It's just it's just Spark with a little bit of data lineage. Okay, dude. Clearly not super up on the platform. And I'll respond to that. Like, hey, a lot of the big data tech we use today uses Spark at the core. Freaking Databricks invented Spark. The founders invented Spark. It's a big part of the stack, but it's not the only part of the stack. First of all, there's another part of Foundry called lightweight transforms for data processing. For record sets with under 10 million rows, that's way more performant and doesn't use Spark. You can also use technology that you want to bring to that layer to process data. Foundry data sets are an abstraction over the storage layer. They aren't necessarily Spark. So I just think that, and also ignores a lot of the abstraction that's sitting in that data set layer. For example, Foundry was one of the first to support transactions in their data warehousing technology, right? So like, then Databricks did it, then Snowflake did it. So like, there, in a lot of ways, in the early, maybe a year or two ago, a lot of people I knew were like, hey, a lot of the decisions that Databricks and Snowflake are making appear like they're chasing, Palantir. And also above the data processing layer, you have the ontology, right? So that's north of the data processing layer, and that includes support for geospatial data, time series data, graph data, full text indexes, and Elasticsearch is incorporated in the ontology. So like, you just don't know what you're talking about when you make comments like that. I understand where you're trying to sandbag it. You're basically saying this one layer of Foundry, the data processing layer, doesn't appear to be as cool as some of these other technologies that I like for data processing because of X, Y, and Z. But to make a statement like that's just freaking stupid, dude. And also, like, you see people, there was a good one that hear about like the platform being garbage for data science. I'll empathize a little bit with the frustration there. It hasn't been the best platform to do data science in the past because there was a lot of clunky steps, and there wasn't notebook support. So when you were doing data science, you were doing it in code repositories that didn't necessarily align maybe with how a lot of ML engineers typically like to work in Jupyter Notebooks. So Jupyter Notebooks is supported. I like the fact that you get version controlled notebooks with the click of a button. I don't have to do any kind of complicated integrations. Yes, I know other platforms support that. But it's not garbage. And I would say, like, today, we're building models all the time in Foundry with their code workspaces and ML objectives. And ML objectives is really interesting because what it does is takes the output, your models, and allows you to see in a champion challenger kind of scenario which model's outperforming the other. Visually, you can promote to production, the better performing model. It's a manual review process, but that is good. You want your data scientists looking at these models and seeing why the scores are what they are, and then deciding which of these models to promote. Now that process of operationalizing the models coming out of code workspaces, I believe it's code workspaces. There's code workbooks and code workspaces. I think it's code workspaces. That process has been a little clunky in the past. I got a demo a week ago of the new way that's going to be done. You'll be able to deploy models with ML objectives straight out of your notebook with a click of a button, dude. Like, it's not garbage. You're just uninformed. Maybe you don't don't know all of the features in the platform and how to use them correctly. So it's definitely not garbage. It's being used by some pretty big data science teams to, like BP, for example, that uses it to operationalize their well production. I use it at work all the time, right? Like we produce models that actually add value for our customers in Foundry using Jupyter notebooks and ML objectives. We also use code repositories. So like, no, it's not garbage. It may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, and it's important to understand like what tool is most appropriate for the task at hand. Which is another point. Like often these Reddit trolls and developers in general, when I talk to them, they get into this binary decision making process about technology. Like it has to be this thing, or it's almost like a form of completism. Like when you're collecting baseball cards or something, you got to have all the things of this one type, or to complete this set. And for them, it's like they have a vision of a stack, and it's going to be this tool in this part of the stack, and this tool in this part of the stack. And like I've been around long enough to just know, like, hey, pick the tech that best suits the requirements. Don't get too caught up in like, does this fit my architectural diagram? Does this fit my perfect vision for my stack? That's just a losing battle, right? So when I read stuff like this, I kind of look at it from that sort of lens of like, well, these are very opinionated developers who kind of have an idea of like what they're trying to build from a technology point of view. But that's going to transition into the next part of our discussion, which is also going to include this article that Sean posted today about avoiding vendor lock, which is another thing you hear from developers that often sound like this, is the vendor lock argument against Palantir. All right, let's move on to the second part of our discussion here, which is really going to be centered around arguments for vendor lock. Sean posted this article today. I'll leave it in a link in the description. Pretty good article. I think that there's some really good points in here, like, open source hybrid cloud equals lock-in free. These are arguments I often have with people, and I'm going to give you read this article. It's a great article, but I'm going to give you sort of my perspective on vendor lock and the arguments that I often make as to why I think in a lot of cases it's bullshit. Now, there are really good arguments to make for vendor lock. CIOs and CTOs are doing their job when they're raising red flags when you bring in Palantir and they're like, hey, I've heard it's extremely expensive. I've heard there aren't a lot of people certified around it. That's going to start setting off alarm bells in the risk profile. But those were more concerns of 2 years ago, not today. Foundry is and AIP are right in line with what I'm paying for anything else. And I know this from usage, hands-on, and all those other technologies, including Palantir. The usage fees are right in line with what you're going to pay. There isn't these huge minimum commits anymore. You can sign up for free, or you can sign up with a credit card and basically spend nothing or $500 a month, depending on how much usage credits you're given. So like those arguments are 2 years old. They don't exist anymore. The one about certified engineers, yes, we need to do better at certifying people, but there is also a great training site here, and your people can get certified. You can upskill. All of the ability to learn is out there. We have learning partners like Taylor at Ontologize. I think there's at least 2 more startups that have launched to teach people how to use Foundry and how to reskill your engineers in the platform. But the good news is that it's based on a lot of open source technology. So a lot of the skills engineers already have and your people already have just transfer over natively. But let's get into my kind of thesis on vendor lock generally. I think there's, the one that gets often overlooked the most is probably around this argument of how do I get out of this platform once I'm in it, right? Like how locked in am I to this technology? Can I ever get my solution out? And the second part of that is like, if I can't get my solution out, am I always going to be dependent on this company to change things? And will I always be spending a certain amount of my revenue or whatever against this business? And so let's talk about the option one here, which is like, how do I migrate out of this thing? And is there a way out? Yes, you can migrate out of Foundry. And what's great about it is because it's based on open source technology, you can literally copy paste the same code. You can export the repositories, right? You can check out the repos, the code that is running to do your data processing. You can promote a visual pipeline like Pipeline Builder to a code repository and check that out. And all that code just works because all it is Spark or Pandas, right? Like, yes, and the Jupyter notebooks. Check out the freaking repo and grab your notebooks. They just work. The only portions that won't work are the Foundry native APIs that are in there, which is a thin layer. It's a decorator to provide typically the Spark context and the input data frames. So with those migration paths being there and being easy, what you have to realize is that not only can I pull out this code, I don't have to write a bunch of other code, a bunch of other investments that are not portable and not easy. And what are those investments? So as I was sort of alluding to earlier, like one argument for building and architectural decisions to be platform agnostic, right, to avoid vendor lock, is to say we're not going to use any of the native abstractions that a hyperscaler provides or platform like Foundry would provide or something. We're just going to write our own, right? And now you're in the business of platform engineering, and that includes things like messaging services to build event-driven architectures, and how do you actually deploy RabbitMQ, like a common open source solution at scale, to do that? And then how do you provide a database as a service like DynamoDB? Maybe you actually need a multi-region, super scalable with however many nines of durability. Now you're in the business of building that. So now you're in the business of trying to provide at least competitive or somewhat reasonably competitive platform level solutions as AWS, Microsoft, and Google. Good effing luck, people. Like, I'm sorry, man, but those are tasks that not everyone is up to. And most of the talent who is up to that challenge does not work for you. It's all been consolidated in high tech companies. So that's a really good way just to fail, right? And not only just fail, maybe you're successful on some level, but you're making insane amounts of money, or you're burning insane amounts of money, make huge investments, not only in cash and capital, but time, right? It takes time to build those things. It takes time to maintain those things. And that's time you're not spending on delivering things your customers actually value. And in that similar vein, there's this other argument that's made around avoiding vendor lock, which is, let's just build it ourselves. Let's build the solution we need ourselves. And that way we're not locked into any, particular vendor or technology. And that's where a lot of these decisions about open source and hybrid cloud and all this come in. And the thing that's always overlooked in that argument, there's two big ones. One is, the reason Silicon Valley works, the reason technology companies' commercial offerings actually make a lot of money and are doing pretty well, is because they can distribute this expense they have, this capital investment they have to make in building this platform. Let's just say it costs $2 billion to build Foundry, right? And it's going to take 10 years or whatever. You have this massive capital cost you're going to have to absorb. Palantir can, recoup that investment over hundreds or thousands of enterprise customers, and they can offer their platform at a much cheaper price, right? So if you're the end consumer of that thing, maybe you spend, let's just say hypothetically, $100,000 on Foundry. But if you had to build it yourself, it's $2 billion in 10 years. And so I think that first discussion is hey, wait a minute, are we in this business, and do we want to make a capital investment in something that isn't actually part of our core business, and that really only the tip of the iceberg is ever going to be used or seen by our customers, and by the way, we can't actually recoup a single dollar of this investment until the whole iceberg gets put in the harbor. The other side to that is there's a huge amount of tribal knowledge that gets created whenever you do anything in technology. It's one of the things we fight against constantly. I'm constantly fighting, how do we avoid tribal knowledge walking out the door? Oh, who knows how this abstraction over here that's responsible for all of the transactions being processed in this database actually works? Oh, that's Bob. Oh, Bob left the company 6 months ago. No one's talking about these kind of consequences in the vendor lock discussion of oh, if we build this ourselves, we actually are responsible for the lifetime of this project, which includes hiring pipelines to replace engineers that leave and making sure they don't walk out the door with all the knowledge on how to maintain the system. And guess what happens 90% of the time when you don't do that? Shit gets rebuilt over and over again, because rather than unpack the abstraction, the developer who got hired yesterday is going to sit down and just write something else, because it's actually quicker for them to just write something new and replace the old thing that they don't understand with something that they do understand. And as part of that, you often get new technology that gets introduced, and it's this cascade effect of oh geez, what did we do? So if you're going to build, you better damn well be sure that's a business you want to be in, and you better damn well do it good. You better do this right, because if you do it wrong, you're just going to burn money. You might as well just take a giant pile of money and go set it on fire and have, roast some marshmallows, because that's what you're doing. So I think that, these discussions about vendor lock, they're complicated. They're often, there are always discussions that are almost coming at this from a religious point of view with best case estimations and a framework that's already in place versus like actual real world, or just like unpacking all of the downstream consequences of these decisions and like what is actually better for the business at the end of the day. And that's the next part of this video. We're going to talk about like, how did we get here? And there's a great video that came out. I posted it on Twitter. There's two good points in here. One is the misalignment between technology and business. And like, how do we actually measure the business value of a technology asset and investments we're making? And is that actually returning beyond nice PowerPoint presentations and everyone feeling good about themselves? What's the actual business outcome here? And how do we measure that? And two, how software developers have become like courted by billion-dollar companies to come to conferences and they get incentives to learn new technology A versus technology B that are deeply personal incentives, talking about their own status and promotions and ability to make money that are tied to these decisions, and they're coming bottom up from these developers into your organizations, and it's determining what your technology stack looks like in a lot of cases. And is that actually a good thing? And that brings us back to the Reddit trolls over here. Does it even matter what developers think? What we're going to see is that we need a realignment between technology and the business so that it's not an adversarial relationship, and that software engineers aren't dictating the business outcomes based upon their preferences, which are largely driven by their personal motivations, right? Their personal incentives to learn this thing or adopt this thing. And they're very proud of their Rube Goldberg machines, and they make a lot of money talking about them and going around showing them on platforms like what I'm doing, right? Like, there's a lot of personal incentives to push things. And you could argue that's what I'm doing with Palantir. Great. But recognize the problem exists, right? Recognize that it's an actual thing. And what that means is that we need a higher level of scrutiny over the decisions being made. But first, let me play a couple clips and then we'll dive into the analysis.
All right, let's jump into this video real quick. I'm going to play it and just pause it and offer my thoughts as we go along. But we're just teeing up big data FOMO, right? So like there was a period started, I believe, in 2016. That was when I started seeing it a lot of like, how do we use big data? How do we make data-driven decisions? We want to be like FANG companies. They've cracked the nut here. They have a secret, which is your business can make a lot of money if you use data to drive outcomes. And so that's where this video is kind of picking up. But there was a kind of caveat to that, which was like, well, yeah, but a lot of these businesses that use data to make decisions and enable outcomes don't make any money, right? And also they're not in the business you're in. So anyway, let's just jump in the video and I'll offer my thoughts as things go on here.
Hype train was at its peak. Between the early 2010s and the early 2020s, Fortune 500 leaders were in crisis mode. Investors were loving FANG and souring on big corporations as dinosaurs trapped in the Stone Age. Walmart, ExxonMobil, Home Depot, Comcast, Disney, PepsiCo, Chase, and other big corporations each committed hundreds of millions of dollars, some of them even billions, to build out such technical capabilities for themselves. They were all eager to signal that they could be just as cutting edge as tech startups and publicly flaunted their investments in big data.
Now that is a really good point. Earlier in the video, I was talking about like some of the challenges associated with trying to emulate big tech companies, and like one of them is just the business models are different, right? Like these tech companies, a lot of them plan to sell their technology over a large customer base, and that's how they're going to recoup their capital investments, or they have a huge runway for growth that these capital investments will be absorbed in, like Netflix or something. So you have to consider whether or not these investments that you're going to make, do you have that same ability to recoup them? And do you have that same runway for growth? And do you expect to see, and do you even understand how much went into doing that? And can you even get the people who are capable of executing? So I think that is like the thing we should all be asking. And that, I think hindsight is 2020. That's I certainly feel that as an engineer who's been in this business for a while, working for enterprises and working for tech startups, is like, yeah, I mean, you really have to consider, like, can we do what these other companies have done, and does or should we be looking to acquire solutions that enable outcomes that are similar without us having to like rebuild things from scratch? Anyway, that's just sort of my first thought when I heard that.
Yet their adoption was fueled by fear rather than merit.
It's hard to imagine an industry that's not substantially altered by this data revolution.
When the airplane is in flight, we know exactly what they need, and we know exactly what part is located. If the next destination do not have a part, then we have to find a way of flying the part coming in. So the key thing is fixing the airplane at the right place, at the right time, with the right part. And if we can do that, then we don't have to worry about airplane grounded.
Unilever's
Interesting side note there. I totally agree with the gentleman there. I would just say that I think Airbus is probably getting a better outcome than Boeing. And I think if I heard it right, Boeing decided to build their own platform versus Airbus that decided to use Palantir and use that as a stepping stone to build this Skywise platform, right? So like this could actually be a test case for exactly what we're diving into today. I think it's a great one. That's nothing against Boeing. It's just that, and these decisions happen everywhere. It just in the context of what we're talking about here and how Palantir is a platform that you buy that enables an outcome versus a technology you develop that you hope will enable an outcome. I think that's a really good case study kind of in this space.
Datadog and Splunk are two leaders in telemetry that to this day have reached billion-dollar valuations selling table stakes for capturing and monitoring data. Tableau and Apogee both benefited dramatically from the big data trend through the 2010s. Snowflake, Sumo Logic, Hortonworks, and Cloudera are all startups that quickly surpassed hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue selling essentials for big data. And all those petabytes needed to be stored somewhere, which led to storage startups like Rackspace, Backblaze, Box, and database startups like MongoDB. The demand for user data meant greater emphasis on SMS and email, which SendGrid, RingCentral, and Twilio were all happy to provide services for a price. The volume of information, sensitivity of data, and complexity of application logic made companies targets for hackers. Security vendors like CrowdStrike, Barracuda, Okta, and Palo Alto Networks have all thrived under the promise of helping enterprises and startups secure their data. And to accelerate execution, startups like Atlassian, ServiceNow, JFrog, Asana, and Slack all build themselves as critical tools for boosting worker productivity and collaboration. Being B2B by default doesn't make for a better business, as Snowflake and many other tech companies to this day are still chasing profitability.
All right, so let me jump in here. I don't agree with everything you said there, like in terms of the technologies and why they were created and what they're enabling. I think there is a general trend there, though, that this wave of companies wanting to, use their data and make data-driven decisions led to more technologies from startups that would enable them to do just that. And as you just saw, they're pieces. There are all these pieces of technology that you could link together and integrate to build a data-driven decision-making platform like Foundry, right? And there's a lot of ways you can glue those technologies together. And the companies are going to advocate for the ones that solve this problem, right? I think that they're all incentivized to try and make more money and make more profit. And those incentives largely drive a lot of the outreach to developers, et cetera, that take place. And those incentives also drive, I think, a lot of the architectures that emerge, because what you see is a partnership between technology companies and the people who implement those technologies. And they align on architectures that I think are more designed for a philosophy that enables profit seeking, not necessarily an outcome for the business. No one's coming to me and showing me architectural diagrams that are here. If you want to drive this revenue, here's the technical architecture and the metrics to track it, to make sure that you're getting a positive ROI on this investment. Most people don't have that architecture. They have an architecture around, if you want to do, I want to build a lake house so that I can do ML ops and then allow, my teams to use data science that will enable decision makers to make data-driven decisions. You might think that sounds identical. No, it doesn't actually, because one is a technical investment and a technical endeavor. It's like an experiment, right? The other is an actual business outcome you're trying to enable, and you're working backwards from the problem of this outcome you want to see happen. And it's probably not, maybe businesses need to do a better job first of identifying the problem they have to not enabling that growth, and work backwards from there, and then bring in the technical architecture. These are technology forward ways of looking at a business that I don't think map on very well. As you're going to see later, the the proof is in the pudding, and a lot of these companies who have been trying to chase the data-driven FOMO and now the AI FOMO haven't substantially improved their business at all, which is kind of interesting. And these technology companies that are in this business of offering the products, again, I don't agree with all the lists here and like how the technology has been categorized. They have their own incentives for how they, frame the technology, frame the problems, etc.
AWS, GCP, and Azure saw their greatest growth during this 10-year period. The consumer startups were spending their funding building their products in the cloud. The Fortune 500s were using big data as a forcing function to adopt cloud in their organizations, and B2B startups were also building their tools in the cloud. To the cloud providers, it doesn't matter if it's big data, machine learning, IoT, augmented reality, or AI. As long as people are using the cloud and whatever trending technology drives them to use more of it, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft all win. Software engineers have always been in high demand, but the paradigm shifted in this time period with big data. Across the private sector, companies were on the hunt for practitioners, offering the highest salaries to the few available with real-world experience in big data. Since the technology was so new, there were no best practices. Everyone was figuring it out as they went along and doing it all in the open on GitHub.
That's right. So I also lived through that. I remember talking with my boss a while ago. I was like, dude, it's like the frickin' Wild West out here. There's no reference architectures. We're all making it up. We don't know if what we're doing is going to work. And again, like a lot of the best talent in the world went straight to the FANG companies and to these technology companies. So if you're, a business, even if you're a successful business, chances are you're not getting the top tier talent. And so you're sort of like just, stuck trying to get as many insights from FANG as you can, and then experimenting as you go. But like this was a real problem, and whenever it's almost like I've heard it said like, oh, never buy a company at IPO, like wait 6 months and see where things settle out. This is not investment advice, but it's another one of those things where maybe it's not best to jump on the technology hype train straight away. Maybe you wait a little bit while the dust settles and the clear winners in the platforms that know how to leverage this, that can solve this as an abstract problem, and then you can apply it in many domains. Maybe wait for that to happen before you decide to jump in head first into all this stuff. And we'll see in a minute maybe why companies did jump in so quickly. There was a lot of FOMO and there was a lot of developer advocacy, I think, that led to a lot of these decisions.
If you're an engineer, you could get experience in big data through your day job or at home through open source. If you knew your way around the most popular tools, you could declare that proficiency on your resume and get rewarded with a higher paying job elsewhere within months. Big data amplified resume-driven software development, where engineers now are incentivized to learn and even evangelize technologies for the sole purpose of maximizing compensation and hireability. Developers today are no longer coding grunts, but instead vocal, visible rock stars who can make demands and spearhead change at their organizations. Engineers get to decide on the behalf of their companies what clouds they want to use, what tools they get to adopt, and what vendors they want to partner with. This is why enterprise startups and cloud vendors each spend millions of dollars every year on conventions, free pizza, and beer just to court developers and to try to convert them into champions of their products. This shift to bottoms-up decision-making, with engineers leading the way, is almost like a battle of religions, where every enterprise startup is trying to convert the most possible developers to their faith at any given time. As a result, software engineering has become progressively more tribal, as developers have hitched their paychecks and career prospects to the popularity of the technologies that they adopt, rather than their business contribution.
100%. Dude, this is why I changed my entire career to advocate for Palantir, to build solutions on Palantir. I was so frustrated with watching this take place. You can go watch my old videos, my old interviews. This is the number one thing I've been talking about since I started using this technology, was like, oh my God, finally a platform that enables a business outcome people care about. And this is why we're here, right? And this is that whole section. I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's 100% true. And a lot of businesses right now are left holding the bag, wondering, where is my outcome I was promised? Why are we still making these investments? It's like a religious endeavor, big data, big data. Dude, like it's all about an outcome. If we can't enable an outcome within a realistic amount of time and leverage this investment appropriately, and an outcome being revenue uplift, cost takeout, right? Like the business runs more efficiently. It can offer products at a cheaper price. We can grow the company. There's value for the shareholders. That's an outcome that people care about. I've always been on the startup side, and the startup side is growth, man. You either grow or you die. And that's been my whole career has been in startups. And you can't have the luxury of like having something that goes on for 5 years, spends hundreds of millions of dollars, and no one knows what happened to the money and like did it enable any kind of an outcome. And this is why we're here, right? And so I think I really appreciate this video because it really summarized in my mind why I became an advocate for Palantir. And I know it sounds contradictory and hypocritical, like, aren't you just doing the same thing that these other developers did? Yeah, on some degree. I think that the difference here is that we know this problem exists, and what I'm advocating for is every technology, including Palantir, be analyzed from the lens of business value creation, not how cool the tech is within the context of a hype cycle. Okay, those are two very different things. And so, and again, this is why I changed my career around. So 100% accurate, really summarized the way I have felt for years. And I think it's something that every business needs to wake up and pay attention to.
This is why there's never any end to the online debates between React versus Angular, Kubernetes versus ECS, and so on. You can see that same tribalism in AI, where there's no consensus on what tool is best, TensorFlow or PyTorch, or which model is most accurate.
Yes, exactly. Now come back over to the Reddit troll world. If you're making investment decisions this way, you are in for a world of hurt, okay? Developers don't fucking know any of that. They don't know, okay? They don't have any answers for you as to whether or not business A is going to be successful. They're making decisions based on almost a religious belief for their team, their technology, their thing. So trust me when I tell you, don't ever go to Reddit for investment advice from software engineers. Do your own damn due diligence. And the best way to know if a technology works, in my opinion, or if it's good, are its customers. Just look at its customers. What are they saying about it? What are the outcomes that are being enabled? And talk to people who directly are, at companies using it. If you don't want to hear the testimonials at a conference, like, just go and talk to the people at those companies who are actually using it and ask them how things are going. And, with like anything, you get a mixed bag of results. And with Palantir, what I see is an incredible list of outcomes that have already been achieved. And a lot of companies that are just on the cusp of being able to realize those same outcomes, provided they apply the tool correctly and they learn how to use it correctly. And that's what makes me really excited about it. But 100%, like, we've got to unpack this and understand how this mentality works and understand that it exists. Otherwise, what business people are going to see is like technology executives making recommendations that are in part influenced, and not wholly, but in part influenced by this bullshit. And it is bullshit. Okay, it means nothing to your business. It does not matter one iota. You could be running your business on the oldest, shittiest technology ever. If it makes you money, that's good, And I think that that's where the disconnect has come. And I think it's so bad now that, and why I'm so excited about Palantir is it's going to force a realignment between the business and IT.
Any difference for the consumer startups and the Fortune 500 over the past decade. If anything, it only prolonged the lifespan of startups that should have never existed in the first place. These days, all companies are doing layoffs, cutting costs, engaging in shrinkflation, and buying back shares to squeeze profits just like they've always done. Things that they shouldn't have to do if big data actually generated the greater business efficiencies and innovation that was promised. There's nothing in the fundamentals that suggests that big data has netted any meaningful improvements for any company. If they're really...
Okay. Now, I don't know if that's true. I would say anecdotally from my own experience, I would say that that's probably true. I haven't seen a massive business impact on these endeavors. I've seen projects that have a measurable impact on the business, and you can point to them. But whether or not that has translated into meaningful growth, top line or bottom line value for shareholders, I think that part is harder to equate. And I think that's the big part of the problem here, is that we too often have had no metrics attached to any of these projects that are traceable through the business, right? Like, what is the, if I go to you, CEO, and I'm the CTO, and I'm pitching a $2 billion investment in a data processing and analytics platform, let's agree on what we're going to see in the numbers that matter, which would be these ones, right? So operating margins and your net incomes, and was whether or not there was revenue growth and what value was created for shareholders. Let's agree on those metrics will have an impact on up front, and how we're going to do attribution, right? So like, how do we go back through our value chain and actually attribute to this initiative the impact to those metrics that matter? If people had done that, I think there'd be less finger pointing right now over something like this, like no evidence of impact. And it'd be clearer to know like which technologies are working and which ones aren't, because we'd have a clear signal we can measure daily as to their impact. And I think that's where Palantir has excelled, in this ability to measure the actual business impact and generate actual measurable business impact. So, I think that at the end of the day, what we kind of want to see in this next evolution of AI, let's make as part of this, and this should feel very intuitive to anyone who's sitting with high-level decision makers who are talking about this today, is are we in a hype cycle or not? And are we just going to get burned by another hype cycle? I think that the way we answer that question is to, one, be honest about the factors that contributed to the hype cycle of big data, recognize the incentives that exist that are misaligned with the business, all the way from developers and their religious objections to the ideas around being platform agnostic and vendor locking. Like, these are like, let's recognize the philosophical incentives along with some of these others, and let's disaggregate them, and let's find a clean way to measure outcomes and agree from the start, from the beginning, that if we don't see key milestones and metrics and business outcomes being enabled, that we're not going to continue these investments, right? And so make every technology investment aligned with a business outcome. And I think that's where we're actually headed with AI. And the reason I kind of feel that way, at least intuitively, I don't have a lot of evidence to back this, is that the people most empowered by AI are not going to be software engineers and propeller hat, people. It's going to be the frontline operators and the actual decision makers. And that's where the value unlock is going to start to come from. And the fact that there's a company like Palantir that has done all the heavy lifting for you, that has taken all of the hard parts out of the technology and done so in a way that was measured from a first principle of business outcome, business impact. Their motto at Palantir is like, we solve the world's hardest problems. It's a very different kind of outlook on things. And the reason they have that outlook is the hardest problems are the ones that actually affect what you're looking at on screen, right? And so I think that's why I think in this case, Palantir is very unique. Why I bet my career on this company, why I think that this new cycle we're in with AI could have a substantially different outcome if we align from a business first fundamentals principle of like, what is the business outcome? How do we measure it? And let's use technologies that abstract away the hard parts, so we're not stuck like we were with big data trying to recruit a pool of talent we just can't get, And let's stand on the shoulders of giants. We're not all going to be 100 feet tall, but we can be 110 feet tall if we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so that's my thoughts today for Palantir and Coffee. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't read too much into everything I'm saying here too. Like, I'm not endorsing everything that's said in this video. I'm not endorsing any of the claims made by this author, but I think it's an interesting frame of reference to have a discussion about what's next and dispelling the myths about Palantir, and especially the myths of the Reddit trolls. Because once you understand the sort of basis for a lot of these criticisms and where people are coming from, and also understand, read through this article on the thoughts here on vendor lock, I think you'll have a much better understanding of how to frame these conversations at your organization. And this time around, let's have a real impact. Let's have a measurable impact on the metrics that matter. All right, that's it for this episode. I'll see you next time.